Welcome to another episode of Tea with HRT, where we talk about the people side of businesses and all the real life stuff that comes along with leading teams. Today, we're digging into something that most leaders know they should think about, but rarely make time for crisis preparedness and business continuity. Basically, what actually happens to your people and your business if something goes wrong.
I really wanted to have this conversation because small and growing companies, they don't typically look at the bigger safety and risks of the team and the business, and they keep that kind of on the back burner. So today we're joined by Erika Andresen, who does this work every day with companies who want to be prepared instead of being panicked. And so we want to welcome you to the show. But before we get into it, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. My TLDR background is I started off as a corporate lawyer and then jettisoned that career to join the active duty military. And I did that for about 10 years. And then I started my own company, which is what I do now, helping small businesses and medium-sized businesses stay in business because through my career responding to natural disasters, because I was advising on the military response to natural disasters, and then being in Afghanistan where every day it's a disaster, multiple disasters every single day. And the risk analysis I was doing of missions, it's like my brain is hardwired to see very terrible things. So I was like, let me put this to good use and help businesses. I was reading a business review article after Superstorm Sandy, and they were all asked the same questions. And the final question being, what are you doing to prepare for next time? And every single one of them answered it the same except one. And they almost all said, oh, this won't happen again. And I was like, oh, no idea how wrong you are. So I was like, this is what I want to do. And then just more from an impactful standard when, because I also teach emergency management to graduate students, I tell them that community impact is massive in recovering from a disaster. And one of the aspects that make the community recover more easily and more comfortably is when small businesses are there because you're providing services, they're supporting the recovery. And then also the mental aspect of just being able to go out and get a matcha latte, just being able to go to a movie when you're stressed and when those aren't options for you, that sucks, right? So
Right.
uh, businesses, especially small ones, are doing so much bigger things than they realize. It's not just about the bottom line in the four corners of their building or their office. Their impacts are massive, which also means that things that can impact them are also massive.
Right. So before we talk about plans and policies, I want to talk about what this kind of really looks like. So for a smaller team trying to get through a typical week,
Mhm.
what does business continuity really mean in kind of plain English?
So I would say, some key word business continuity is an enabler. It allows you to actually do your job seamlessly, or if there is a problem, it's an annoyance instead of a disaster or a catastrophe. Um, it's kind of like a guarantee that you're going to be around to serve your clients and to keep your employees employed. It's also safety of everybody in the building and also the processes that you're using. Everything is secure. And it's probably the thing that you should be doing, but you aren't because you just don't think that it's that big of a deal. So I say it's the four P's. It's the people, because the people are the biggest asset, the premises, the actual building itself, the processes and your providers. So the providers who are, third-party providers for like if you're farming out your HR, if you're farming out your IT or cyber. And I recently told somebody, like, I don't care what the why is, I care the what. So there was a leader who wanted to take vacation. It's 20th anniversary of her and her husband. And she's like, he's going to kill me if we don't go away. And he wants to go to Europe, but we're about to launch something. And I need to be here in case something goes wrong. I'm like, okay, what are the odds of that happening? She's like, very small, but I need to be able to come back. And I went, why? Did you train your team on this? She's like, well, I haven't had time to. I'm like, okay, we're going to train your team. I said, because here's the thing. If your daughter's in the ER, you're not going to be like, honey, hold on, doc, you got this. I got to go to the office, right? That's just not going to happen.
Right.
Why does it make a difference if you're on vacation versus you're in the ER with your kid? The end result is you're unavailable. And if you've prepared your team appropriately, that doesn't matter the why. So
Yeah. So when things go wrong, what are some of the hidden stresses on leaders and teams that we don't usually talk about until it's too late?
well, first, there's that saying, haste makes waste. And when you're stressed out, you're not making really smart decisions because when you have the calm time to think it all through, you're like, oh yeah, of course I would do this. No, this makes sense. But when you're stressed out in the moment and like it had just happened, you're like, oh my God, what do I, you're in panic state. And even if you're really good at reacting, you're missing things. So I live in Asheville, North Carolina, which was hit by Hurricane Helene a year and a half ago. And there's a food bank near me, right on the river. They got destroyed by the flooding. But the days leading up to, they had moved their trucks up the hill to the gym I work out at. And I was like, woohoo, they're doing business continuity. That's amazing. Hope to God those trucks are filled with their food.
Yeah.
Weren't. And I asked the facility manager when I was interviewing him, I'm like, why didn't you put the food in the trucks? He goes, I didn't think about it. I wished I did. I didn't think about it.
Right.
And he had an emergency action plan. And that just wasn't part of it for whatever reason. And I was like, it could have been different. So yeah, like this, trust me. Think about it too. It's like it's similar to estate planning. So when somebody is sick and dying and they're your loved one, if they've not done a healthcare proxy, you're like, what are we going to do? And if they've not done a will, it's very stressful for everybody, more emotional. If it's all figured out in advance, you know what to do. There's pieces of paper that are telling you what to do. So that alleviates the stress for a lot of people.
Yeah. And as a business owner and working with so many of the others, there's so much to stress about. There's so much in and out of the office to stress about. And so when you can create a plan to put in place so that it creates this sort of like unstressful guideline, group of guidelines or policies, it makes it a lot easier. So, Erica, what kind of trends are you seeing around active threats and emergencies in the workplace?
So I find active threats, it really depends on what you do and where you are. So if
Hmm.
you're in a hurricane prone area, active threat's going to be a hurricane.
Hmm.
But one of the things I've been doing more of lately, because I've made it available, I previously only made it available to clients who I assessed this as an actual risk. But now I'm like, this is very interesting because of current times. I used to only do active shooter training for clients who I thought were a risk. Now I offer it for more people because I know how much more beneficial it is just to have in that back pocket. You are now increasing your odds of surviving an active shooter threat. And we're looking at like, in New York City and DC, people are showing up and shooting guns randomly
Hmm.
more prevalent now than they ever had. And they don't even need like a good reason to. And there's a difference between somebody who comes in with an intention to do specific harm to you or your company specifically, or somebody who's just stressed out and they're trying to relieve their stress and that's how they decided they're going to do it. Or maybe literally caught in the crossfire of two people who have hot tempers and they happen to get into a fight in front of your business or in
Right.
your business complex. So there's a lot more happening now that I think if business leaders, because again, the four P's, people is one of them. You got to protect your people for lots of things. And having active shooter training is a big thing. I also find that, one of a threat is, Brenda, you had mentioned earlier, your statement was you put things on the back burner. And I think this is a latent threat for a lot of people because when you leave something on the back burner for too long, it winds up burning down the house. And that's what happens with something like business continuity. They're like, I have to worry about the thing that's right in front of me right now, not the thing that's going to guarantee my longevity and my ability to get through something that happens later. So they keep leaving it, and then they wind up being, instead of the person who's proactive, they wind up being the person standing on a burning platform saying, Dear God, what do I do now? And then their best option is maybe throw up a GoFundMe, but that's not a plan.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And that sort of like nice to have situation. It's like, yeah, we can have that or we can do this training. Our kids get that training. I mean, like I have boys in middle school and in elementary school, and they get this sort of training all the time just to prepare them to have sort of that nuance in their head of this happens, this is what I do. This happens, this is what I do. That repetition is really important. And for businesses, it becomes a critical risk if it's ignored, but they don't see it that way, right? So the advice that you give, and this is not training that we do at HR Transformed. We bring in experts like you, Erica, to do this for our clients or make the introductions because we see it as a risk in just walking into a building, whether in New York City or in Texas or wherever we go to visit our clients. And it kind of dawns on us like, oh, we need to connect them with Erica. And so, that nice to have needs to be sort of recognized as a critical risk. And like, when's the point that that happens prior to an emergency happening? Do you know when it sort of clicks for those business owners?
So it's when there are other events going on. So I had mentioned it was a client in Chicago. I was looking at their commercial lease, and this was an unexpected little surprise. In the commercial lease, they had the layout of their office within the building, and I went, "Oh, and this is from my time in Afghanistan, right?" So I'm looking. I was like, "Fascinating door, narrow hallway, long narrow hallway, windows. I'm pretty sure that don't open, dead ends into a big office." I'm like, "This is an active shooter's dream." Let me go onto my phone and look at the address and drive around the building with my finger. And I was like, "Interesting. Okay." And then I put the address in Google to see who else was in that building. And I'm like, oh dear God, these are all businesses that if something went wrong with their client would be really pissed off and come up and shoot up the place. And then later, so I mentioned this to the COO, and she's like, well, I'll mention it to the CEO. He might be kind of like, about it. And then literally 3 days later in Midtown Manhattan, a guy went into trying to find the NFL building and, did an active shooter situation. And then they're like, oh, yeah, that's really weird timing. And then one of them lived by Oak Island in North Carolina. And then right next door, like a few weeks later, an active shooter drove a boat and shot up a bar there. And she was like, I was at that restaurant earlier that day. And I left. She's like, so we're doing this. And then she said, I'm going to just ask the staff to see how they feel about it. And the receptionist and the person whose office is first, she's like, hey, we're thinking about doing this. What do you think? They're like, yes, because few days ago, somebody was screaming and throwing things down the hall at the other office, and we had to like lock the door and turn off the lights. So I'm like, it was just this momentum that just so happened. Kind of like they say, oh, there's more plane accidents now. And it's like, no, there's just more reporting of it, and we're paying more
Exactly.
attention. So you
Exactly.
understood the amount of times. I mean, there's a different definition of an active shooter and just a mass killing. It's all about intent. Doesn't matter. If you look at gun violence in the US, the amount of activity of gun violence that happens this year so far is astronomical if you actually look it up. And you're like, why am I hearing about it? Because the news cares more about children. You'll hear about kids getting shot up in schools. But the thing too, I think when you're talking about your kids are getting this training, that's very different training than I would do because they're not teaching the kids to fight back. And that's part of
Exactly.
the adult thing. It's run, hide, fight because they're like, this is your last ditch effort. If it gets down to it, you have to save your life. And this is what we're doing. So from my background, I'm a third degree black belt. I used to teach self-defense classes. I'm a veteran, know how to clear a room, and been deployed. And then also I had training by the FBI on active shooter, and I'm actually taking a training next week on Secret Service active shooter. So like I have the knowledge base to help people, and I get physical. I'm like, okay, attack me. I want you to know what this feels like. Hey, if you want to make this barricade, move this today. I need you to know how heavy this is. So
Right.
on that day, you're like, here's my plan. Oh no, it doesn't work. And that's also kind of like ties in with business continuity. You need to know what it's like today. So when it happens, you're not like, oh no, I don't know what to do, it doesn't work.
No, exactly.
So, Erica, when you look at how companies are approaching crisis planning and continuity right now, what are the biggest gaps? Like, what are things that leaders usually assume will just work out on their own?
Uh, well, first I'll say that some of the biggest gaps are they don't understand their full risk profile at all. They don't know what it is, and they don't fully know their business either. And that's one of the huge benefits of business continuity because we dig into so many things. They're like, oh, I didn't realize that. Oh, I had no idea that those were connected. But I'm looking for all these, blind spots and all these potholes that we're going to fill in. So not just what could potentially happen, what's current that's going on that I'm like, there's a problem. And I find that when owners have start a business, they put placeholders and they kind of forget about them. So I'm like, hey, what about this? And they're like, no, I didn't do that. I'm like, yeah, you did, because I have the document. I read it, and they're like, oh my God, I forgot about that. I did that a while ago. I meant to update it. And yep, it's like, okay, so there's that. But also with the crisis planning, they're looking at the first step. So common example, not for crisis planning, but just a relational example. People will think, oh, I have a generator. I'm going to buy a generator in case the power goes out. That's fine. But here's what I'm looking at the second, third, fourth order effects. What is the capacity of your generator? Is it 2 hours? Is it 6 hours? What do you actually need it for? Do you need more than one? And if is it diesel? Is it solar? If it's diesel or it runs on propane, do you have a supply of that? And if you don't, where are you gonna store that? And then you're gonna store it safely. And then also think about the fact that if it's making noise, people get desperate. They know where it is, and if they want to, they'll steal it. So you have a security. Like I'm looking at all of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
In detail too. I mean, the amount of detail that you're looking at it is what gets missed. So
yeah,
from the HR perspective, I'm seeing that the roles that people take in their organization, and especially in a time of crisis, having been a COO for many years in my long career so far, um, I remember getting the responsibility of having to write the business continuity plan. And I was a COO really focused on HR. My whole career is in HR. So I was able to look at it from that sort of business perspective and then recognize everything else that we needed to bring in, like all these different people. We had to give them responsibilities. We had to get their buy-in, their agreement. And like you said, moving the cabinet, moving the file cabinet, it's way too heavy, and actually putting them through this. So, in the workplace, I'm seeing that when it comes to supporting a business continuity plan or even something like focusing on it, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of convincing sometimes. And it can be better if you bring in people who are passionate about the workplace and making sure that the business can continue. Because I remember being pulled in, I think it was swine flu many years ago, as our first sort of foray into this whole business continuity concept. And I thought, wow, is swine flu ever going to hit New York? I mean, it would be really interesting. I've never been through that before. And then we were so prepared for COVID because everything was in its place and keeping it updated was there. So, I think people think it's also a set it and forget it situation. So,
Yeah.
um, when you say that a workplace is prepared, what does that really look like in practice? Because I know from the COO perspective, but being in a position where I'm now running a remote company, a lot of our clients are partial remote, employees are remote, or maybe they're working out of shared spaces. Maybe they have no control of those shared spaces and how they manage business continuity, and their employees are sitting there like, what does prepared really look like?
So there's a lot to that. So prepared, it's looking because I've worked with people who have spread out remote people, and I'm like, okay, so there's the aspect of how do I make sure that whatever it is that what's your mission, what's important, and then I start taking things away, and I'm like, okay, if you don't have this, what does that look like?
Hmm.
Screwed. I'm like, okay, let's unscrew you now. Let's figure out workarounds for this, and not just one. I mean, simply a lot of things with smaller businesses, especially family run, or I mean, this would be an aspect for HR too. It's like succession planning, like who in the next order gets to be in charge of something. And a lot of people don't actually delineate that at first, but if it's a family run business, it's like, okay, I'm going to have my spouse or my child or my parent be my next, and it's like, do you guys travel together? Yeah. So what happens when the plane goes down? Does one
Right.
of you get to survive? And they're like, oh, I said, so you're actually a single point of failure. You haven't solved the problem. You've actually just moved the need. You just moved the ball down the road. It's still a problem. You haven't actually solved it at all. And a lot of these people, they'll say, okay, let me get a plan. And they might buy one from a compliance products company just to check the box. Hey, I have a plan. I'm more secure. No, you're not, because these are not tailored to your company. To even to a point, they're done very sloppily. I've seen one where the client had Azure as their provider for their cloud stuff. And then the contact, the POC for Microsoft was listed as no reply at Microsoft.com. I'm like, are you kidding me with this?
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, okay, you clearly like you paid money, you made a couple of $1,000s for this, and that's ridiculous. And
Hmm.
then so having the plan itself doesn't make you more secure. Going through the actual steps is something that does make you more secure because you've learned about what the issues are, what the friction points are, and how they've been solved. But even with that, you have to have a training to understand, like the whole team, the whole office needs to understand why we're even doing this and what does that look like? And then an exercise. Because I find a lot of people, what I like about the exercise is it's proof of concept. We imagine this is what would happen, this is what you would do in this situation. How does that actually play out? Is it reasonable? Does it make sense? But worse than that, the first time, and I expect this because I used to write exercise in the military too. I expect this every single time. The first time they do an exercise, they're awful at it because they've never done it before. It's very odd to them. I'm like, okay, here's your fake scenario. What are you going to do? They're like, huh. Well, I guess I would do this. And I mean, so and so can do that. I'm like, remember that thing you pay me to write? It's up on the
Hmm.
wall. Like, you want to reference that? They're like, oh, yeah, that. Like, okay, let's go through it. And then I'll throw in extra wrenches. So they're like, all right, now everybody's going to get sent home because they work hybrid. I'm like, go home. That's what you're going to do. You're going to work from home at this point. And then I tell one, I'm like, you can't answer any more questions because you're dead. And she's like, what? I said, don't, doesn't matter why, I've made you dead. And then I'm like, they're like, well, well, so and so's taking care of this. I'm like, how do you know that? Well, because she went home. I said, how do you know she got there? I said, if there's a regional blackout, the traffic lights don't work. So there could be an accident. And they're like, oh, I'm like, so you have to think about accountability too. Don't make assumptions.
Yeah.
And you're not thinking about that. You're thinking like, oh, clearly went home. We're good. Everything's running the way it should be. Don't make assumptions. And then you have somebody like me, like you said, Emily's passion. I am going to get into the sticky nitty gritty that you don't want to think about. Plus, your brain is not hardwired to see it. So there we go. Like I make sure like, there's nothing I want more than for you to continue. And I want to put you in the best position possible to make that happen.
Exactly. And I remember many years back, there was a scaffolding accident in New York City, and we know that there were employees out visiting clients well before COVID when everyone was just like on the train, in cabs, just everywhere in New York City. And I remember having put a calendar in place where everyone had to send their calendar invites to HR so that we always knew where people were. And they felt like it was so intrusive and like, why do you need to know exactly where I am all the time? And it's like, well, if anything ever happens, we have to be able to account for all the bodies that came to work that day.
Yep.
And so I remember the scaffolding had fallen and it was it was right near our building. If not, I forget if it was like diagonally across the street. And people were hurt, streets were shut down, and we couldn't find two employees. And I was panicking, of course, because on the calendar, it didn't tell me that they were at a client meeting
Mhm.
and they hadn't put it in there. They hadn't put in their travel time. So I didn't know if it was a virtual meeting. I didn't know if it was an in-person meeting. And so these two employees are missing. And I was texting and calling, and I finally got a hold of them. They said, we were on the train coming back from the client meeting. I was like, it's not in your calendar. It's not anywhere where we could see, and I'm panicking. And they
Yeah.
thought I was a little bit bonkers. But there are leaders out there, HR people, COOs that may be listening, even employees, obviously. We have a broad scope of listeners who could care about this kind of thing. And there's obviously a few things that leaders could do right away to kind of get more intentional with this sort of planning and with this sort of mindset. What is something that they need to recognize right now, or maybe one small thing that they can put in place right now that can get them towards being prepared?
I think the first thing you should, as far as what can they recognize right now, is there's three types of people that do business continuity. One is a forward-leading leader who wants to pivot and be agile when they can and be secure. There's a person sitting on a burning platform, which is the one I referenced. And then there's a person that's being forced to do it by an outside party, regulatory compliance, in order to secure a commercial bank loan, in order to get an insurance policy, in order to pass due diligence for a sale. Those people are doing because they have to. A person who wants to be a forward-leading leader and be agile, I get very few of those, but I get so excited when I do. And I think the first thing you need to recognize is, who are you? One of those three personalities is you. Figure out which one you are currently and which one you would like to be. I'm hoping it's the agile, prepared person who cares for those types of things. And then way to start thinking about this. I mean, it can be daunting because the biggest part of business continuity is it's a very time intensive thing. And it doesn't have to be that time. It doesn't have to be that hard. There's a lot of low hanging fruit that can get taken care of easily and quickly. So starting with thinking about first, you just already talked about it, accountability, because people miss
Right.
all the time. Every single exercise I've ever done, they miss accountability. And I'm like, fun fact, firefighters don't put out fires, they're search and rescue first. So they will
Right.
suppress a fire if they think they're looking for somebody in the building because you don't know where they are. You didn't know that Timmy took a long lunch, right? Because nobody knows. No, he didn't say anything. Also, you don't know if the person who's hard of hearing, listening through a headphone, working in the stacks, is there because they didn't hear the fire alarm. So there's, accountability is really important. That's the first thing. The second thing that they could start doing is just imagining taking away the things that they assume are going to be there. So if you think like, you don't have internet access, what does that actually look like for you? You can't assume you have cloud access because that's dead if you don't have internet access. If you have VoIP phones, you don't have phone connectivity. So there's a lot of things just to be like, I want you to realize how screwed you'd be if you don't do this, honestly, because you don't have to use me to do it. Just start thinking and start planning because at least you'll get yourself further ahead. And this should be a selling point too to clients. It's not just, something that you keep a secret internally. You should be like, oh, and by the way, we are very resilient. We've done this plan. So if something were to happen, we're good. You can rely on us to serve you.
And I think the beauty about your brain is that you said it earlier, you think about things that come from and pull from your experience and your exposure to certain things. The same way my brain is wired for HR things, your brain is wired for these really incredible things because we're not looking for them and you are. So just even being in conversation with you when we had our first conversation, I was like, oh my gosh, gotta think about that. And then you walk away and that call to action has to happen. Like we have to make something move because when you're in the position, you say, oh, I wish I would have had Erika in here, or I wish I would have done that. And you don't want to be in that position later on.
It's easier to do this in advance. It's really so much easier in advance.
Yeah.
You're working with something that's more complete. And then it's also cheaper to do it in advance because after the fact, you've already lost a lot. And then you're trying to, because even with disasters, they say every $1 spent in preparation and mitigation of a disaster saves you $7 on the back end. So
Mhm.
everything's more expensive and do not rely on insurance because insurance, if they do pay out the claim, and I know a lot of reasons why they don't, and I prepare my clients for that, but if they do pay out the claim, it may not be necessarily on your schedule. It might not be the amount that you need it. It could not line up when your bills are due. There are a whole bunch of things that you're not, because you're like, oh, I never had to. What think about car insurance. You're not made whole instantly. That's a pain in the butt to deal with if you're ever in an accident. And it doesn't, having insurance, the car insurance does not make you less likely to get into an accident. So don't disabuse yourself of the notion that you're fine if you have insurance because you're not.
Right. Thank you.
Well, Erica, thank you so much for joining us. This is one of those topics that when we, break it down and really talk about it, it feels doable and like human.
Mhm.
So where can people learn more about you and the work that you're doing if they're ready for support?
So my website's the easiest place to go for that. It's a clearinghouse for everything, links to articles I've written or places I've been in like Forbes and ProPublica. My blog's there, links to my books that you can get on Amazon. The first one is called How to Not Kill Your Business. And the second one, based off of my experience from Helene, is When the Shit Hits the Fan. So yeah, so the website is www.eaasc.com. And that's short. That's my plan, software as a service, but it's Erica as a service because you get me and my expertise.
I love it.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll be sure to put that in kind of the description of the video. But yeah, thank you again for joining us on Tea with HRT. Before we end our episode, we must carry on our Tea with HRT tradition. Erica, since you're our guest, you can go first. What do you have in your cup today?
So I have a herbal strawberry shortcake tea.
Oh, wow. Never heard of that. That's good. Eileen's?
I always also mention my cup. So I visit a client in Miami every month. And last month I was able to visit my sister that she lives near Fort Lauderdale. So of course I was in the gift shop and got myself a Fort Lauderdale cup that is really very Florida-ish. And so I am doing my regular decaf caramel latte.
Awesome. And I'm almost done with my regular iced coffee that I have every day. First one of the day, might be the only one of the day. All right. Thank you, everyone. Until next time, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.